All right, everybody. Here we go with the final part of this methods of the differentiation series focused on the derivative of the inverse. So we've already covered basic derivative rules, product rule, quotient rule, chain rule, implicit differentiation, and that brings us to derivative of an inverse function. So with that, keys to success. Know what an inverse function is. Know the formula for the derivative of an inverse function. Really important we know this first part first. Make sure have that down from Algebra 2 or your previous class. And then know the formula for the derivative of an inverse of a function. Then we'll apply it with given a table of values, and that will conclude this lesson. So with that, if we have a given function, y equals f of x, it takes an input and maps it to an output y. The inverse of f of x, which we represent as f inverse of x, inverts this relationship. So think about it as like undoing or inverting that relationship. The inverse function maps the outputs of f back to the inputs of f of x. So we'll see an example of this in the table in a moment. This will be a much better way of seeing it rather than me just trying to talk about it. So on the left, we have the function f of x. 0 maps to 3, 2 maps to 4, and 4 maps to 8. On the right, we have the inverse, and that's going to switch those x and y values. So 3 maps to 0, 4 maps to 2, and 8 maps to 4. We see that the x values in one are the y values in the other, and vice versa. And so a quick CFU. For a given function f of x, we know that f of 4 equals 8 and f of 2 equals 4. Given this information, determine the following. Take a moment to think. Try those three. Pause the video if you need to. And the inverse of 4, so I'm thinking what y value, where does the y value of 4 map back to an x value? So if I look at f of 2 equals 4, the inverse is going to map 4 back to 2. Then if I do the inverse of 8, that's going to take 8 and map that back to 4. Then if I try the third one, I'm going to try to take 2 and map that back to, oh, I don't have any y values of 2, so I actually can't determine that given the information I'm presented. Usually you want that one, if you come up with that error on an AP multiple choice question, you're thinking about something wrong, so try to rethink about it. So then you need to know the derivative of an inverse function. You need to know the formula for that. So it comes from the chain rule. Right now we're going to skip that derivation because this is mainly focused on review for the AP exam. So here's the formula. Derivative of the inverse is equal to 1 over f prime of f inverse of x. How to remember it? Here's what I like to say in my mind. Pretty much exactly what you said. The derivative of the inverse of f of x is 1 over the derivative of f of the inverse of f. A little bit wordy. We'll see it in practice in a moment, but try to internalize that. And then can you see or say the derivative of the inverse formula? If you can't, rewind the video, recap, review it a little bit. If you can say it now, you've got it down. So it's derivative f inverse of x equals 1 over f prime of f inverse of x. And then way to say it, another way to say it, derivative inverse of f of x is 1 over the derivative of f of the inverse of f. There we go. So now to bring it home, we're going to focus on an example. So take a moment to copy this down if you're following along. And I'm switching to the doc cam so you can follow my thinking over there. All right, here we go. So I have this table of values. Consider the table above for select values of the function f of x and its derivative f prime of x. Let g of x equal the inverse of f. Determine the value of g prime of 4. All right, so I'm looking for the derivative of 4. When I look at that, I see that g of x equals f inverse of x. So if I'm looking for the derivative of g, when I take the derivative of g, I'm actually taking the derivative of f inverse. I'm going to start writing some things down. G prime of x equals the derivative of f inverse of x. And then I got to think in my head, what is that formula? It is 1 over f prime of f inverse of x. And so this equals that. So then if I want g prime of 4, that will be equal to 1 over f prime of f inverse of 4. And then we want to evaluate this from the inside out. So we're going to first find what is inverse of f of 4. So I know on the table, f of x maps 6 to 4. So the inverse would map 4 to 6. This will be 1 over f prime of 6. then from there, the derivative of f at 6 will be 1/5. So I get 1 over 1/5. And if I do divide by a fraction, it's like multiplying by a reciprocal, I get 5. And we just solved that question. If you missed anything there, feel free to rewind it. That's the beauty of video. And I'm taking it back to PowerPoint now to close out. All right, here we go. So we just finished that example, very quick video. With that, keys to success, just to recap, you need to know what an inverse function is. It's gonna be tough to do some of this work if you don't really have that down. Need to know the formula for the derivative of the inverse of a function. We recap that in the video. And then also be able to apply this with a table. You may see some other examples in your practice, but it's very frequent on the AP exam that they assess this with a table. And so with that, we've covered 6 videos in this playlist, from basic derivative rules, your more complex product quotient chain, apply the chain rule to implicit, and then we just closed out with derivative of an inverse function. As always, open to feedback on how to make these videos better. Hope this helped you master derivative of an inverse function.